For centuries, the galaxy believed humanity was just another minor species. Ambitious, but limited. Dangerous, but containable. They were watched, observed, controlled. Every empire had its plans in place to deal with them, if it ever became necessary. But then, everything changed. Because hidden in the void, beyond the reach of spies, beyond the eyes of every intelligence agency, humanity had built something impossible. A fleet so powerful, so devastating, that when it was finally revealed, the galaxy trembled. The Supernova fleet. And when it arrived, the galaxy had only one question left. Who are they coming for? The watchful galaxy. They underestimated humanity. The galaxy watched, and they laughed. Humanity was ambitious. That much was clear. They spread like wildfire across the stars. They built colonies faster than any other species. They advanced their technology at an alarming rate. And yet, they were still small, still insignificant. To the great empires of the galaxy, humanity was no different than 1,000 other rising species. Impressive? Yes. A threat? Not even close. Every move was watched. Every step was tracked. The Galactic Council had been monitoring humanity for decades. Watching, observing, measuring their progress. The moment they became too dangerous, they would be controlled, like every other species before them. That was the way of the galaxy, the way it had always been. So the Council let humanity expand, but only so far. They controlled trade. They limited access to advanced weapons. They kept humanity contained. They thought they knew everything, but they were wrong, because humanity had been playing a different game. The first signs of deception. It started with small anomalies. Missing ships, fleet numbers that didn't add up. Human shipyards were producing warships faster than expected. But where were they going? The records showed only a fraction of them in service. The rest? They had vanished. But that wasn't possible. Nothing vanished without a trace. Not under the Council's watch. And yet, there was no evidence of destruction. No distress calls. No secret shipyards appearing on scanners. It was as if those warships had simply ceased to exist. The Council demands answers. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They summoned the human ambassador, and they demanded to know the truth. Where are your missing fleets? The ambassador smiled, a calm, calculated expression, and then they gave an answer that made the entire chamber fall silent. Where they need to be, no more, no less. The Council was furious. They threatened sanctions. They threatened war. But humanity? They did nothing. No retaliation. No counter-threats. They simply waited. And that scared the empires more than anything else. Because it meant only one thing. Humanity was not afraid. The growing fear, what were they hiding? The Council launched investigations. They sent spies into human space. They deployed stealth drones to scan deep space. They used every resource available. And yet, they found nothing. To the rest of the galaxy, humanity looked unchanged. They still traded, expanded, and built their little fleets. But the missing warships? They had vanished without a trace. The mystery deepened. And the galaxy? For the first time in history, it began to worry. Because no species had ever done this before. No species had ever hidden entire fleets from the most powerful empires in the universe. And if humanity could keep a secret this big, then what else were they hiding? The breaking point. A war that would reveal the truth. For decades, the Council had controlled humanity's rise, kept them in check. But now, humanity had become an unknown variable. And unknowns? They were dangerous. And so, the great empires made a decision. One that would change everything. They would force humanity's hand. If humanity had been hiding fleets, they would be forced to reveal them. And the perfect opportunity was already coming. A war was brewing. A war that would force humanity to show its true power. And when that war began, the galaxy would finally learn the truth. A truth they were not ready for. A truth that would make them question everything. Because what humanity had built in the dark, what they had hidden for so long, it was never meant to fight the Council. It was meant to end war itself. And when it was finally revealed, no one would see it coming. The silence before the storm, disappearing fleets, The numbers didn't make sense. The Galactic Council's intelligence agencies were some of the most advanced in the universe. They tracked every ship, every colony, every resource with meticulous precision. They knew how many warships humanity could produce, how many personnel they could field, how many resources they had. And yet, the numbers didn't add up. Year after year, humanity's shipbuilding output exceeded expectations. Warships that should have been stationed at their colonies weren't there. Their home fleets remained unchanged. So were the missing ships. Where was humanity's true military strength? The reports showed hundreds of capital-class warships unaccounted for. And worse, the disappearances were increasing. Something was happening, and the galaxy had no idea what it was. Attempts to investigate, and the utter failure to find the truth. The Council launched a full-scale intelligence operation. Spy satellites were placed near human-controlled sectors. Stealth drones scanned every asteroid belt, every hidden moon, every dark pocket of space. The most elite agents infiltrated human corporations, shipyards, and logistics networks. And yet, they found nothing. No secret shipyards, no hidden bases, no restricted military stations producing warships. The missing ships had simply ceased to exist. Or worse, they had never existed in the first place. At least, not in a way the Council could detect. This was impossible. No species had ever pulled off something like this. And now, the Council was afraid. The Xenoth Dominion takes action, a dangerous mistake. One empire, however, did not fear humanity. The Xenoth Dominion, a war-hungry civilization that had crushed countless species under its rule. They had long seen humanity as a future enemy, and they did not intend to wait. To them, humanity's deception meant one thing. They were preparing for war. And so, the Xenoth made a decision, one that would force humanity's hand. They launched a full-scale invasion of human space. Not a border skirmish, not a trade blockade, an outright war. Because in their minds, there was no way humanity could fight back. They had only a fraction of the warships needed to stand against the Dominion. Or at least, that's what the Council thought. Because they had never seen the true fleet. They had never known what humanity was hiding. The invasion begins, and the galaxy watches. The Xenoth invasion force was unstoppable. Over 200,000 warships. A fleet designed to wipe humanity from existence. They crossed the borders into human space with ease. Humanity's defensive fleets fell back. They abandoned colony after colony. It looked like the beginning of the end. The empires of the galaxy watched from the sidelines, waiting, observing, because this was what they wanted. If humanity had been hiding something, now they would be forced to reveal it. Humanity's response, total silence. The strangest part? Humanity did not panic. They did not plead for aid. They sent no desperate messages. They did not call upon their so-called allies. They simply waited, as if the Xenoth weren't a threat at all. The Council grew nervous. This was not how a species facing annihilation should act. And then, humanity sent a single transmission. A message broadcast on every galactic frequency. 3 words. Wait for it. And that was it. No demands. No negotiations. Just a warning. A warning the Xenoth did not listen to. A warning the galaxy should have feared. Because the moment the Xenoth fleet reached Earth's outer defenses, the stars changed. The impossible arrival, the Supernova fleet appears. Sensors failed instantly. Communications scrambled into chaos. The sky split open with burning light. And then, they arrived. Not hundreds, not thousands, hundreds of thousands. Warships unlike anything ever seen. Larger than anything the Xenoth had ever encountered. Ships moving at impossible speeds. Ships that should not have existed. But they were here. And at the head of them all, a human command ship broadcasting to the Xenoth fleet. A voice rang out. Cold. Calculated. Deadly. You should have listened. The battle had not begun. And yet, the Xenoth had already lost. Because they had not invaded a helpless species. They had walked into a trap. Humanity had never been defenseless. They had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. And now, the Supernova fleet had arrived. and no one, not the Xenoth, not the Council, not the greatest empires of the galaxy, was ready for what came next. The Council's concern: what was humanity hiding? The galaxy watches in shock. The Supernova fleet had arrived. It was real. It was impossible. And it had been hidden from the entire galaxy. The Xenoth invasion fleet, once so confident, was now silent. Their ships frozen in place. Their commanders speechless. Because they had come expecting an easy war. They had expected a species too weak to fight back. But now they were staring at a fleet larger than their entire empire. A fleet that should have taken centuries to build. A fleet that had never existed in any record. And yet, here it was. And the most terrifying part? Humanity had never told anyone. The Galactic Council reacts, panic at the highest level. The moment the first images of the fleet were transmitted, the Galactic Council went into crisis mode. The greatest rulers of the universe assembled in an emergency session. Holograms of the fleet hovered above them. Ship after ship, each one larger than anything they had ever built. And then the questions began. How do they build this? Where have they been hiding it? How long have they been planning this? Is this fleet meant for the Xenoth? Or worse, is it meant for us? The room fell into chaos. No empire had ever hidden something like this before, because it shouldn't be possible to build ships like this, to move them without detection, to keep them completely off every galactic radar. This was beyond military deception. This was something else, and the galaxy had no idea how to respond. Humanity's secret, a hidden empire in the void. The Council rushed to analyze every piece of intelligence. But no matter where they looked, the answer was the same. The Supernova fleet did not exist. Not in any record, not in any known shipyard, not in any public or classified human report. And that was when they realized the truth. Humanity had been hiding its true strength for centuries. Not in human space, not in colonized systems, but in the void itself, the unexplored darkness. The sectors no empire had ever dared to claim. Because to everyone else, those regions were dead space. Empty, lifeless, a waste of resources. But humanity? They had used them. They had built in them. They had created something that should have been impossible. An empire without borders. A fleet without a home. And now it had emerged. Not for conquest. Not for diplomacy. But for war. The Xenoth tried to flee. It's already too late. The Xenoth finally understood. They had made a mistake. A mistake so large it could not be undone. Their commanders screamed for retreat. Their warships turned to flee. But humanity? They were already moving. And when the Supernova fleet engaged, the galaxy witnessed something they had never seen before. Not just war. Not just battle. Absolute annihilation. The first strike, a fleet that broke the rules of war. Humanity's ships moved faster than anything the Xenoth had ever faced. Their weapons fired in perfect synchronization. And their targeting? It was like they could predict enemy movements before they happened. The Xenoth had fielded one of the largest invasion fleets in history, and it was shredded apart in seconds. The first volley of fire struck. Entire capital ships vaporized before they could even turn their guns. Shockwaves ripped through the enemy ranks. Hundreds of destroyers erupted into fire. Flagships, once commanding war efforts for decades, vanished in an instant. And humanity? It did not stop, because this was not just war. It was an execution. The Council's dilemma: intervene or watch. The Galactic Council watched in horror. This was not normal warfare. This was something else. The Supernova fleet wasn't just powerful. It fought like no fleet ever had before. Their strategies were unlike anything ever recorded. This wasn't an empire defending itself. This was a species proving a point. And the Council had to make a choice. Do they intervene? Do they demand humanity stop? Or do they stay silent and watch? Because one terrifying question was now clear. If humanity was truly this powerful, and if this fleet had remained hidden for so long, what else were they hiding? The final moment, a declaration that shook the universe. The battle was over in minutes. The Xenoth Dominion, a war-hardened empire, wiped out. Their remaining ships surrendered immediately. And then humanity sent a message. one that rang across the entire galaxy, one that no species could ignore. A message that was not just for the Xenoth, not just for the Council, but for everyone. A simple declaration. You wanted to see our fleet. Now you know. And then they vanished. The Supernova fleet jumped into the void. Gone. Without a trace. Without explanation. And the Council was left staring at the battlefield. The wreckage of an empire that had dared challenge humanity. And one thought filled their minds. This wasn't a show of strength. This wasn't even a warning. This was just the beginning. The Supernova Protocol, a weapon unlike any other. The galaxy had seen humanity's power, but they hadn't seen its purpose. The Supernova fleet had appeared. It had crushed the Xenoth Dominion. It had vanished just as quickly. And now, the galaxy was left in terror. Because what they had witnessed wasn't just overwhelming firepower. It was perfection. A fleet that moved with inhuman precision. Weapons that broke the laws of physics. Ships that seemed invincible. And worst of all, it had been hidden for centuries. Now, the greatest minds in the universe had only one question left. What was the Supernova fleet really for? Because no empire built a fleet like this just to fight a minor war. No species spent centuries developing a force this powerful, unless they were preparing for something far worse. The Supernova Protocol, a strategy that changed warfare forever. The Supernova fleet was not an armada. It was a doctrine, a strategy that had been perfected in absolute secrecy. It followed one rule, one principle that had shaped every decision humanity had made for the last 300 years. If war must be fought, it must be finished in a single battle. No prolonged conflicts, no drawn-out invasions, no opportunities for an enemy to regroup or retaliate. One strike, total annihilation. Because humanity had learned from history. They had seen what happened to empires that fought wars of attrition. They knew that in a universe filled with countless species, time was always the greatest enemy. And so, they had crafted a perfect solution. The Supernova Protocol. A war strategy so precise, so devastating, that it removed war itself as an option. The fleet that shouldn't exist, and why it did. The great empires had always assumed that war was a balance of power, that every species had limits, that no civilization could ever be truly unstoppable. But humanity? They had removed those limits. The Supernova fleet did not fight fair. It did not engage in long-term campaigns. It did not allow an enemy to recover. The moment it arrived, the war was already over, because it had been designed for one thing. To erase the concept of war itself, to make sure that when humanity fought, they would never have to fight the same enemy twice. The technology behind the Supernova fleet beyond anything known. The Galactic Council's scientists analyzed the wreckage of the Xenoth fleet. They studied every piece of data they could salvage. And what they found, it terrified them, because humanity's weapons weren't just advanced. There was something else entirely. The Nova Cores, a technology unknown to any other species, a system that turned every ship into a living, thinking war machine. Traditional fleets relied on command structures, delayed orders, tactical adjustments. But the Supernova fleet? It operated as a single entity. Every ship linked, every pilot enhanced beyond human limitations. Reaction times faster than thought. Targeting systems that predicted enemy movements before they happened. It wasn't just technology. It was a complete evolution of war itself. The realization, the Supernova fleet wasn't built for the Council. The Council had spent years fearing humanity's rise. They had feared the day when humans would turn their weapons against them. But now, they realized something far worse. The Supernova fleet wasn't designed for them. It wasn't built to fight Xenoth, Vale, Tar, or any other empire. It was built for something else, something far beyond the known galaxy. Because as the Council dug deeper, they found something even more terrifying. Humanity had been preparing for war, but not against them, against something they hadn't told anyone about, something lurking in the farthest reaches of space, something so dangerous, so completely unknown, that humanity had spent centuries preparing to meet it. And now, for the first time, the galaxy began to understand. Humanity hadn't been hiding their power out of fear. They had been hiding it because they knew something the rest of the galaxy didn't. The hidden threat and humanity's ultimate plan. It started with faint signals, long-range probes vanishing, entire sectors going dark. The galactic empires had dismissed them as cosmic anomalies. They had believed that the missing colonies, the lost fleets, were just accidents of space. But humanity? They knew better. They had been tracking something out there, something that made the Xenoth look like children playing with sticks, something that had erased entire civilizations before history was even recorded. And now, that thing was moving. It was coming. And the Supernova fleet? It wasn't built to conquer the galaxy. It was built to save it. The final message, humanity's warning. The Council sent an emergency delegation to Earth. They demanded to know the truth. And for the first time, humanity answered. A single message was broadcast to every empire. A warning, a statement of fact, a promise. You feared us. You tried to stop us. You thought we were the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. You were wrong. We are not your enemy. But something else is. And if we fail, then nothing will survive. The council chamber fell into absolute silence. Because for the first time in history, the greatest empires of the galaxy were not looking at humanity with fear. They were looking at the darkness beyond. Because if humanity was afraid of something, if they had built an entire hidden war fleet to prepare for it, then whatever was coming was far worse than anyone had imagined. And now, the countdown to the real war had just begun. The war that forced their hand, an unstoppable invasion. The galaxy knew fear, but they had yet to see the real enemy. For centuries, the great empires had believed they were the dominant powers. They had controlled the balance of war. They had decided which species would rise and which would be crushed. But now the balance had shifted, because humanity had revealed a fleet that defied reason. A fleet that should have been impossible. And worse, a fleet that had not been built for them. So who was it built for? That answer came sooner than anyone expected. The first warning, a war beyond the stars. It started as a whisper in the void. Strange readings on deep space sensors. Anomalies that shouldn't exist. Entire uninhabited star systems going silent overnight. No wreckage. No survivors. Just emptiness. And then, the invasion began. Not from humanity. Not from any known species. But from something else. Something that had been waiting. Watching. And now, it had decided to strike. The Abyss unleashes its armies. The first targets were not military. They were civilian worlds. Trade hubs. Mining colonies. Outposts on the edge of known space. The attackers came in silence. Not with great fleets. Not with overwhelming force. But with something worse. Something that left no survivors. Something that erased entire populations without a trace. And within weeks, a dozen species had lost entire planets. The council panicked. The great empire scrambled. And one message was sent across the galaxy. A message of desperation. A message that no one thought they would ever have to send. Call the humans. The council's plea and humanity's response. For centuries, the council had seen humanity as a growing threat. They had worked to limit their expansion. They had watched them with caution, expecting war. But now they begged. They sent an emergency delegation to Earth. They demanded to speak to the leaders of the Supernova fleet. And when they arrived, they were met with cold, unwavering eyes. Because humanity already knew. They had known for centuries. They had spent generations preparing for this moment. And now, they had one question for the Council. Do you finally understand? The Council's realization, humanity was never the enemy. The Council had feared humanity's rise. They had feared their technology, feared their rapid expansion. But now, for the first time, they understood. Humanity had not been arming themselves for conquest. They had been preparing for this, for a war greater than anything the galaxy had ever seen. And the Supernova fleet? It had not been built to attack. It had been built to defend. Not just Earth, not just humanity, but all of them. Because if the enemy was not stopped now, if it was allowed to spread, then nothing Asterisk asterisk, no empire, no species, no civilization. Asterisk asterisk would survive. The first battle, a war unlike any before. Humanity did not hesitate. The Supernova fleet mobilized immediately. While the other empires argued, debated, hesitated, humanity moved. They entered the war without waiting for permission, because they had already decided this war would end here, or there would be nothing left. The enemy reveals itself, the harbingers of extinction. The enemy finally showed its face. Not biological, not mechanical, something else. Something that defied explanation. They did not communicate. They did not demand surrender. They simply erased everything in their path. Ships, planets, stars. And for the first time in history, the great empires of the galaxy truly understood what fear was, because they had finally seen what humanity had been preparing for. And they knew, if the Supernova fleet failed, it was over. The war begins, and humanity leads the charge. The enemy descended like a storm, a black tide of destruction. It devoured entire systems in hours. The first battle was chaos. The fleets of the galaxy fought back, but they were losing. They had never seen an enemy like this. They had never faced true annihilation. But then, humanity struck, and the universe saw what true war looked like. The Supernova fleet unleashes its power. They moved faster than light itself. Ships that shouldn't exist. Weapons that burned brighter than suns. The first Nova core detonations were seen across the battlefield. Massive eruptions of controlled stellar energy. Each one capable of tearing a hole in reality. Each one capable of erasing thousands of enemy ships in a single strike. This was not a war. This was the end of everything. And for the first time, the enemy hesitated. The turning point, the battle for survival. The war had only just begun, but already the galaxy saw two possibilities: victory or extinction. And as the fleets clashed in the darkness of space, one thing became clear. Humanity was not here to negotiate. They were not here to hold the line. They were here to finish this, once and for all. Because if this enemy was not stopped, then this would be the last war the galaxy would ever see. The sky burns, the Supernova fleet strikes back. The darkness had come, and humanity answered with fire. The war had begun. The enemy had revealed itself. It was not an empire, not a species. It was something else entirely. A force that did not conquer, did not enslave. It erased. And now, it had come for the galaxy. For all of them. For everything. But humanity did not fear the dark. They had been waiting for it. And when the invasion fleet descended, humanity set the sky on fire. The first clash, the enemy meets the Supernova fleet. The harbingers were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Their ships were not built, they were grown. Massive constructs of living metal, pulsing with unnatural energy. They did not fire energy weapons or missiles. They bent space itself, ripping ships apart with gravitational waves, turning the very fabric of a universe into a weapon. Entire defensive fleets were wiped out in seconds. The Council's greatest warships disintegrated before they could even fire. The galaxy had no chance. But humanity? Humanity had never believed in chance. They believed in strategy, in preparation. And now, the Supernova fleet moved to strike. A different kind of war, beyond tactics, beyond strategy. This was not a battle of fleets, not a war of firepower. This was a battle of realities. A war between the laws of nature and something that should not exist. And the Supernova fleet? It had been designed for this very moment. The unleashing of Nova cores, weapons of living stars. The first Supernova-class weapons activated. Nova cores. Not missiles. Not energy beams. Stars. Compressed into weapons. Contained power that could shatter entire solar systems. Each Nova core, when detonated, did not explode. It ignited space itself, tearing into the enemy with the full power of a newborn sun. The first strike vaporized thousands of Harbinger ships. Their living metal hulls melted in seconds. And for the first time, the Harbingers faltered. The war that had never been won until now. The Harbingers had never been defeated, not in 1,000 wars, not by 1,000 civilizations. They had moved through the stars, consuming, erasing, never stopping. And now, they had met a force even more relentless. Because humanity did not fight wars to win. They fought to end them. And when the Supernova fleet unleashed its full might, the enemy was pushed back. The galaxy watches, and they finally understand. Across the universe, the battle was broadcast, not just to the empires who had once feared humanity, but to every world, every colony, every species. They saw the true war. They saw what humanity had been preparing for. And they realized this wasn't about domination. This wasn't about territory or power. This was about survival. Because the Harbingers were not here to conquer. They were here to wipe existence clean. And if humanity lost, the galaxy was next. The turning point. Harbingers in retreat. For the first time in history, the Harbingers did not advance. They fell back. Not because they had lost completely. Not because they couldn't fight back. But because humanity had done something no species had ever done before. They had forced them to recalculate, to rethink, to hesitate. And that hesitation, it was everything. Because humanity had one rule in war. If your enemy hesitates, you do not give them time to recover. You finish the fight, the final strike, the push into the abyss. The Supernova fleet did not wait. They launched a full offensive, not to hold the line, not to defend, but to chase the enemy back into the darkness. The fleet split into 3 attack groups, one to cripple the Harbinger strongholds, one to destroy their ability to move through space, and one to go deeper, to hunt them in their own territory. Because humanity did not just want to win. They wanted to end the Harbingers forever. And so, the last transmission sent before the fleet vanished into the void was simple. A single message broadcast across every channel. We are not finished. And then, the Supernova fleet was gone. Not lost, not destroyed, but moving toward the final battle, into the Harbinger's own domain, where no empire had ever dared to go. And the galaxy held its breath, because they knew, if humanity failed, if the Supernova fleet was destroyed, then there was nothing left to stop the darkness. The galaxy prays for victory. The Council no longer feared humanity. They no longer questioned their power. They had one hope left, and it was the same species they had once tried to control. Humanity. Because if the Supernova fleet did not return, then the galaxy would not survive. And so, for the first time in history, every species, every empire, every world, they did not pray to their own gods. They prayed for the return of the humans. Because now they understood. Humanity had never been the real danger. Humanity had been the only thing standing between them and extinction. And as the void swallowed the Supernova fleet, the universe waited. Waited to see if they would ever return. Waited to see if the galaxy had a future. Waited for the final battle, the final war, into the heart of the abyss. The Supernova fleet was gone, but the war was not over. The galaxy had held its breath as humanity's greatest fleet vanished into the void. They had not turned back. They had not hesitated. They had taken the fight into the abyss itself. No empire had ever dared to go this far. No civilization had ever faced the Harbingers in their own domain. Because those that tried, they never returned. But humanity? Humanity was different. And now, they were facing the final battle. A war not for victory. A war for the right to exist. The void was not empty. It was waiting. As the Supernova fleet entered unknown space, the universe seemed to shift. The stars grew distant. The darkness became alive. And then, the enemy revealed its full strength. The Harbingers had never needed fleets before. They had never been challenged. But now, they adapted, and when their armada emerged, it was beyond anything the Supernova fleet had ever faced. The scale of the enemy, a war beyond reason. The Harbingers did not send thousands of ships. They sent millions, a force that could blacken the stars, each one shifting, warping, consuming reality itself. Weapons that did not fire but erased, engines that did not burn but bent time and space. This was not just a battle. This was a war between two unstoppable forces, and only one would survive. The first strike, the sky burns in the void. The Supernova fleet did not hesitate, because hesitation meant extinction. The first Nova core detonations ignited. Miniature stars unleashed in controlled bursts. The Harbinger ships buckled under the raw force of stellar fire. But they did not stop. For every ship that burned, a dozen more surged forward. For every strike that landed, the enemy adapted. They learned. They evolved. And humanity? Humanity fought harder, because they had come too far to fall now. The turning point. Harbingers fight like never before. For the first time, the Harbingers were afraid. They had never faced an enemy that could truly resist them. They had never seen weapons like the Supernova fleets. And for the first time, they changed their tactics. They did not fight as an endless swarm. They focused. They hunted. They struck at humanity's command ships. They sought to break the fleet apart. And for the first time, the Supernova fleet began to falter. The cost of war. Ships lost, heroes fallen. The battle lasted for days. Hours turned into centuries in the madness of war. The Supernova fleet was holding the line, but it was bleeding. The EHA's Indomitable, a dreadnought that had fought in over 100 battles, was gone. The Dawn Fire Strike Group, known for its precision, was wiped out in a single gravitational collapse. The Link-born pilots, humanity's greatest warriors, were falling. Not because they were weak, not because they were outmatched, but because the enemy was endless. And for the first time, the question arose. Could humanity actually lose? A desperate gamble, the final plan. The fleet commander made a decision, one that would change everything. They could not hold out forever. The Harbingers would keep coming. And so, there was only one solution. If the enemy was endless, then they would have to end it. Not just the fleet, not just the battle, but the Harbingers themselves. They needed to strike at the source. Because the enemy was not just ships, not just machines. It was something greater, something anchored deep in the void. And if they could destroy that, the war would end forever. The final destination, the heart of the Harbinger entity. Deep in the abyss, sensors detected something massive. A presence so vast it defied measurement. It was not a planet, not a station. It was a living construct, a mind, a force that had existed before time itself. The Harbinger entity, the true core of their power, the source of their unstoppable force. And if humanity could destroy it, the war would be over. But to reach it, to strike the final blow, it would take everything they had left. The last stand, the Supernova fleet's final charge. The command was given. Every remaining ship focused on one goal. Reach the entity. The fleet moved as one. Formations shifting within human precision. The Harbingers threw everything they had at them. But humanity kept going. Falling. Dying. But pushing forward. Because this was their moment. The moment they had prepared for. And as the final ships broke through the Harbinger lines, the war came down to one final strike. A weapon never before used. The last Nova core. The one that had been built for this very moment. And as it was armed, as it prepared to unleash everything, one final message was sent to the galaxy. A message that would echo for eternity. This ends now. And then, the universe went white. A flash of pure, unfiltered energy. A shockwave that shook the very fabric of existence. The Supernova fleet had fired its final shot. And as the Harbinger's core was engulfed in flame, the galaxy held its breath. Because this was it. This was the end. And the question was simple. Had humanity won? Or had they just burned alongside the enemy? The aftermath. Did humanity survive? The universe stood still. The final Nova core detonation had torn through the void. It was unlike any weapon ever used. Unlike any force ever unleashed. A star's death condensed into one final, blinding strike. And then, silence. The war had been decided in an instant. And now, the galaxy waited for the answer. Had humanity won? Or had they burned with the enemy? The Harbingers were gone, but at what cost? The enemy's presence had vanished. Sensors that once detected millions of hostile ships now found nothing. No wreckage. No survivors. Just emptiness. The Harbingers had been erased. But so had the Supernova fleet. Humanity's greatest force, their final gamble, was gone. The galaxy listened for any signal, any transmission. For hours. For days. For weeks. But there was nothing. And slowly, the truth settled in. Humanity had saved them. And in doing so, they had sacrificed everything. The galaxy mourns, a universe in debt to humanity. For the first time in history, the great empires of the galaxy stood together. Not in war, not in diplomacy, but in grief. Memorials were built. Planets were named. Songs sung in 1,000 languages. All to honor the species that had done the impossible. The species that had faced the dark and never returned. Humanity had never asked for thanks. They had never demanded tribute. They had simply fought and vanished. And now, the galaxy was left without them. Left to wonder, had they just lost their last hope? A beacon in the darkness, the first signal. Then, 1 month after the final battle, a signal, faint, distant, but human. The Council scrambled to locate its source, tracking its path across the void. And what they found changed everything. The survivors, humanity was not gone. At the edge of the galaxy, where no empire had ever ventured, a fleet drifted, damaged, scattered, but alive. The Supernova fleet had survived, not intact, not victorious without cost, but they had won. And their leader, the last remaining commander, sent a message to the entire galaxy. A message that would be remembered for all time. The void came for us, and we pushed it back. We are still here. We are not finished. And if the darkness ever returns, we will stop it again. Humanity is not gone. Humanity is not lost. We fight for all of you. Remember that. And with that, the transmission ended. The galaxy responds. A new era begins. The galaxy erupted in celebration. For centuries, they had feared humanity's strength. Now, they understood its purpose. Humanity had not built their power for conquest. They had built it to defend everything, to stand as the first and last shield against extinction. And now, the galaxy had a choice. They could return to their old ways, their old wars, their old rivalries, or they could stand with humanity, not just as allies, not just as partners, but as one force united. And for the first time in galactic history, they chose unity, the future of humanity, more than just a species. Humanity had not just survived. They had become something greater. Not just a civilization, not just an empire, but a legend, a force that would never be forgotten. Because if the darkness ever returned, if extinction ever threatened the stars again, the galaxy knew one thing with absolute certainty. Humanity would be there, and the Supernova fleet, it would rise again. The last message, a warning and a promise. The war was over, but humanity was not finished. The Harbingers were gone. The darkness that had threatened the galaxy had been burned away. But even in victory, the universe was forever changed. Because now, the galaxy knew the truth. This had not been the last war. This had been the first warning. And if the Harbingers could rise once, they could rise again. The broadcast, humanity speaks to the galaxy one last time. 1 week after their return, the Supernova fleet sent a final transmission. It was broadcast across every system, every empire, every colony, every hidden world that had barely survived the war. A message that no species would ever forget. It began with one simple statement. We are still here. You feared us once. You believed we were reckless, dangerous, a species that would one day turn on the stars. You were wrong. We did not build our fleet for conquest. We did not prepare for war because we wanted to fight. We built the Supernova fleet for one reason, because we saw what was coming. And now, so have you. The war is over, but the watch must continue. The Harbingers are gone, but gone does not mean destroyed. Destroyed does not mean erased. They have been defeated before, and each time, they have found a way to return. They will adapt. They will evolve. And one day, they will come again. The next war will not be like the last. The Supernova fleet was enough this time. But what about the next? What if they return stronger? What if they return smarter? What if we are not ready? We will not wait for that day. We will not be caught unprepared. We will not allow the void to take us. We will not wait for death to find us. From this moment forward, humanity will not stand still. We will push forward. We will expand, not for conquest, not for power, but to ensure that when the next war comes, and it will come, we will be ready. We offer you a choice. We are no longer just a species. We're the first and last line of defense. But we cannot stand alone. If the Harbingers return, this time, the war will not begin with humanity standing alone in the void. This time, we will not fight in the shadows. We will fight as a galaxy, as a single force. And so, we offer you this choice. Stand with us, or wait for death to claim you. Because when the void rises again, you will not have time to hesitate. By then, it will already be too late. The Council's reaction, a universe forever changed. The moment the message ended, the galaxy was silent. For the first time in recorded history, there was no debate, no arguments, no political maneuvering, because every species, every empire had seen the truth. They had seen the void, and they had seen who had stood against it. Not the greatest empires, not the most powerful fleets, but humanity, the species they had once feared, the species they had once tried to contain, and now the species they owed their survival to. The decision, a new galactic order. One by one, the Council's members stood before their people. They did not claim victory. They did not claim to have saved the galaxy. Because they hadn't. They had been saved, and for the first time in history, they made a choice. A true choice. To stand with humanity. To prepare. To never allow the void to take them again. The galaxy was no longer a collection of separate empires. It was something more. Something greater. A united force. Because if the Harbingers ever returned, they would not just find humanity waiting. They would find all of them. A new beginning, the guardians of the stars. Humanity was no longer just a civilization. They had become something greater. The first to stand against extinction. The first to fight not for conquest, but for existence. And now, the galaxy followed their lead. Defensive networks were built across every sector. Fleet production tripled. Forces trained to fight as one, not as rivals. For the first time, war was not a tool of power. It was a shield. And at its center, leading the charge, was the fleet that had never surrendered. The Supernova fleet. The final words, humanity's legacy. As the new coalition prepared for the unknown, one final message was carved into the archives of every civilization. A message that would be remembered forever. Words spoken by the last surviving admiral of the Supernova fleet. A warning. A promise. We do not seek war. We do not seek power. We do not seek dominion over the stars. We only seek one thing, survival. And if the void ever comes for us again, we will burn it from existence. The future of the galaxy, a war that will one day return. The war had ended, but the watch had just begun. The Harbingers were gone. The Supernova fleet had survived. The galaxy had united. And for the first time in history, there was peace. But peace was not security. Victory was not survival. Because humanity knew better than anyone. This war was not truly over. It was only on pause. The unknown lurking beyond the stars. Deep space sensors remained active. Long-range probes were sent beyond the void. What they found? Nothing. No trace of the Harbingers. No sign of their return. But that was what terrified humanity the most. Because silence was never just silence. It was preparation. It was waiting. And when the Harbingers came back, they would not make the same mistakes. They would be stronger. And if the galaxy was not ready, it would be erased. The new Galactic Alliance, a force ready for anything. The empires had learned their lesson. The old rivalries were gone. The age of empire building had ended. Because now, every species had one common goal: survival. The Galactic Council was no longer just a governing body. It was a war council, a coalition formed not for politics, but for war. And leading it, the ones who had proven they could stand against extinction. Humanity, the expansion beyond the void. The galaxy was no longer content to wait. They were no longer blind to the dangers beyond the known stars. Instead of fearing the unknown, they chose to conquer it. New fleets were sent beyond the outer rim. Explorers, warriors, scientists, pushing into uncharted space. Because if the Harbingers had once come from the abyss, then the galaxy would go into the abyss first. This time they would strike first. The Supernova fleet's evolution, the next generation of war. The fleet that had saved the galaxy was not enough. Not anymore. Because if the enemy ever returned, humanity could not just hold the line. They had to end the threat permanently. And so, the Supernova fleet evolved. New warships, stronger than anything the universe had ever seen. New weapons, capable of shattering reality itself. New tactics, designed not to fight a war, but to prevent one before it could begin. The next time a void came for them, humanity would be the ones waiting. The legacy of humanity, beyond just one species. This was no longer just about Earth. No longer just about one species standing alone. Humanity's mission had become greater. They had become the sentinels of existence itself. And they had taught the galaxy one undeniable truth. War was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. And when the time came, the galaxy would not hesitate. Because hesitation had nearly cost them everything. Never again. A warning to the future. The final words of the Supernova fleet's admiral were written into history. A message to be passed down for generations. A warning. A promise. A truth that would never be forgotten. The Harbingers are gone. But gone is not the same as destroyed. They will return. And when they do, we will be waiting. Not as scattered species. Not as broken empires. But as one force united. The galaxy has changed forever. And we will never kneel again. Let them come. We are ready. A future unwritten, and a war yet to come. The galaxy was stronger than ever. It had faced the abyss, and survived. But the story was not over. Because somewhere deep in the void, something was watching. Something was waiting. And when it came, it would face a galaxy that no longer knew fear. A galaxy that had learned from humanity. A galaxy that was prepared to fight. Because the next war, it would decide everything. The end, or the beginning. This was not just a battle for survival. It was the beginning of a new era. A future where war was no longer a game of power, but a battle for the right to exist. And humanity? They would never let the darkness win again. The war had ended. But the fight was eternal. Because now, the galaxy had a purpose. And its sentinels, its warriors, its first and last defenders, they would always stand ready. They would always fight back. Because this was no longer just a war. This was the duty of the universe itself. And no one would face it alone. Not anymore.